Lunchtime series. This is the final installment of our 3-week looking into growing calves in this trying environment with high feed prices and some definite challenges trying to get wheat pasture established this year. We've in the past weeks gone through some of the different alternatives as far as dry wintering calves on dormant range or stretching wheat pasture that we do have, going into some more normal or common growing systems with hay-based or high roughage-based diets. And this week, we have the opportunity to get one of the nationally recognized experts in growing cattle and stocker cattle nutrition and management. And he's going to talk about one of the more cost-effective and efficient, but management intensive growing programs in using program feeds with high concentrate diets. So this week we have Dale Blasi from Kansas State University. He is from a family farm and ranch in southeastern Colorado near Trinidad, Colorado. He got his BS and MS from Colorado State in '84 and '86. And he finished his PhD in 1989 as I was getting into graduate school. He got his PhD from University of Nebraska, and he looked at protein supplementation strategies for beef cows and growing cattle even at that time. He started his career as a livestock specialist, as a regional specialist in Southeast Kansas, dealing with cow-calf and stocker nutrition and management. He's been in Manhattan, Kansas at the main campus of Kansas State since 1997 as a state extension specialist. Can't believe it's already been that long since you moved there. In 2005, he was charged to develop and expand the Kansas State Beef Stocker Unit. Done an incredible job there with that. This is a unique animal research and education unit where he conducts research to evaluate nutrition, management, and health strategies for newly arrived and growing calves. Dr. Blasi, I appreciate you speaking to us today, and I'll let you get started.
Thank you, Dr. Beck. It's a privilege to join you folks. I appreciate the invite very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can move forward. Trying to here. I might need some help.
Dr. Blasi, we can see your screen there.
Yeah, looks good, Dale.
It's funny, I don't see it, but let me see if I can bring it up. There we go. All right, I'm going to do slideshow and proceed from the beginning. It's good to be here. I was charged with visiting with you folks a little bit about some of the work we've been doing with limit feeding over the last 6 years. Much like the challenges that you folks are facing in your neck of the woods with the winter wheat grazing, we're certainly no stranger as well to the drought, the incidence and the severity and the variability of precipitation in our state as well. And from a forager's perspective, as we look at components in our diets, forages are a real inconvenience. I think we recognize, certainly as a ruminant nutritionist, we realize the importance of forage, its presence in our growing diets and so forth. But by the time you worry about transport, availability, grinding, and then the fact that it's a diluent in many cases in our diets, it's marginally digestible. You figure 45, 50% at best. So there's a lot of pass through with what the roughages can bring to the diet. So we went to our playbook and looked at a lot of stuff that's been done successfully in the past and modified what we've been able to do with using limit feeding. This is a picture taken, a drone shot this past summer. We're doing some work right now looking at shade versus no shade and limit feeding versus.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're not advancing the slides. We're on a PDF. I'm wondering if maybe we aren't in the, we've got a PDF of your slides showing, but not a PowerPoint.
Well, I was using a PowerPoint. Is there any way you can give me that capability, Dr. Biggs?
Well, you should be able to, if you'll stop your share.
Okay, I'm stopping share.
Okay. Then go back and click on, like, shut it. I would close out of that PDF if it's open on your desktop there.
I don't, oh, okay. Close out of the,
Close out of the PDF and just leave the PowerPoint up,
okay.
and then try the share from there. See if that does it for us. Okay, there we're in PowerPoint, and then you should be able just to go from that slide. Perfect. Look good
Okay.
there.
Do you see the facility?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my apologies, folks. This is just a drone shot of our facility. We have 40 pens. These pictures illustrate looking at shade versus no shade and full fed versus limit feeding. We have water meters on all of the pens. We're doing a sustainability grant for the beef checkoff. This is a 2-year project. It's being coordinated by Dr. AJ Tarpoff. When I started this facility 15, 20 years ago, I was pretty impressionable at that time. And I look back and I can't tell you folks at Oklahoma State how much I admire the institution and the work that you guys do. And I think when I started putting this facility together, I was thinking of the wonderful work that had been done at Pawhuska and certainly now at the Sparks Center, but also at Amarillo. And that's how I idealize this facility, to try to do a lot of work with the newly arrived highly stressed calves. So enough about that. Just know that if you're ever in the area, you're more than happy. We'd be more than happy to show you around. One thing about receiving calves, certainly the long haul highly stressed calves, is that the number one rule is to not compound stress. I think that we appreciate that. We know that as animal scientists. And it seems like the first thing we seem to do upon arrival is we provide these calves with a form of something they're familiar with, that being the long stem hay. And we try to get these calves settled down, get them up to the bunk, try to make their lives as easy as possible before moving on forward with whatever protocols that we do. Some of the great work, and I still cite it back, I mean, it's getting back into the dark ages, especially when I was back in school, but I think we appreciate and understand how important dry matter intake is for newly arrived calves. And we do know that if they're not feeling well, they're not going to eat. So we keeping that concept in mind as we move forward with our work. Some great work that Glenn Lofgren out of Clayton and certainly out of Oklahoma State with Rivera back in 2005. We know with newly arrived calf dilates that as we step up the concentration of dietary energy in their arrival diets, we seem to see an uptick, if you will, in the percentage of morbidity in these calves. And of course, as you make diets that are more digestible and higher in energy, you're actually maybe removing the roughage, and in the process of doing so, replacing that with a fermentable carbohydrate, that being cereal grain of whatever. And so perhaps this uptick is a consequence of the severity, increased incidence of subacute acidosis. We also know that as we increase the concentration in our receiving diets, that we also see performance as well. So this increased dietary energy often offsets the slight increases in sickness that we observe in our calves. And out there in the real world, talking with nutritionists, they don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole because they just don't want to have some bad marks on their performance, knowing that this can potentially happen with calves of unknown origin or unknown management styles, if you will. Now, this picture illustrates what we've done in the past as we, loosely use the word stepping up our newly arrived calves. And I drew a line there, basically partitioning off the roughages as you increase from base 1 after about 5 days to base 2, and then ultimately to the majority of our feeding phase to base 3. And you could see that we're looking anywhere about 40% roughage to where we dial it down to 25 or so, and increasing the concentration of the corn, and certainly relying heavily on our co-product, be a wet corn gluten feed or wet distillers, what have you. Now, limit feeding, I've used this slide a lot, and I've called a lot of people. I talked to Robbie Pritchard, who was formerly at South Dakota State here about 2 months ago, and I asked him who actually started limit feeding. And I figured in his line of work with his bunk management work, he would know. He did some calling around, and he actually told me that Dr. Bob Lake, who was actually a nutritionist at Hooker, Oklahoma, for the Hitch family, in this publication, coincidentally, come out of Oklahoma State. You guys did some great work back in the 80s and 90s for sure. But limit feeding, defined, is a feeding technique approach that utilizes the California net energy equations. Knowing the basic weight of the calf that you start with, you can calculate the quantities of feed required to meet and partition out the needs for maintenance and desired specific rate of gain. I have another picture here from some of the great work that OSU has done in the past as well. We know from previous work that it's been around for a long time. We observed improvements in feed efficiency. I will tell you from our work that with what we're feeding today in our diet model that we're using, we're seeing no negative long-term impacts on health. And also we're seeing a vastly improvement in health detection as well. This feeding technique decreases feed costs, waste removal, and basic expertise at bunk management. Of course, it allows you flexibility with commodity purchase and trading. I'll show some information looking at the less roughage used in a diet and the consequences on manure handling as a result, the decline or decrease in feed wastage, less labor, equipment, and feeding expense, and then the overall planning for marketing of these calves when it's all said and done. The analogy I use with ad-lib diets, it's kind of like going to Las Vegas, gambling in the middle of the night, and then going to an all-night, all-you-can-eat buffet. You just smatter it on, and after a while, you just don't know when it's time to eat or if you even care about eating, as opposed to the regimented breakfasts in our military, where our young men and women get up early in the morning, they do their calisthenics, their PT duty, they come in for 10 minutes, they eat, and then they go about their business for the day. Very regimented, very controlled. And I liken the contrast between an ad-lib diet versus a limit-fed diet in this vein. So while limit feeding in our particular model increases dietary, it does increase dietary energy. Now, do you guys see my pointer moving? Dr. Biggs?
Yes, sir,
Yes,
we
we
do.
do.
Okay, so this represents 100% ad lib. So this would be our ad lib, 90%, 80% down to 70, and the increases in mega cows are represented by the 0.9, 1.11, and 1.2. What we see typically increase in the concentration in our diets is an improvement in feed efficiency, and the causes from our work with our cannulated cattle, we see a decline. We have a decrease in intake, a corresponding decline in passage rate, which allows for greater improved digestibility. And we're already using higher energy diets that already have more digestible based ingredients contained within them, the byproducts, as well as our cereal grains as well. Now, back in the day with our limit feeding, the early work done in the 80s and 90s, limit feeding, the mode of action, how we would do it basically was start them out slowly, and over a period of 14 days or so, we would transition these calves to limit fed diets. And you look at the composition of some of these typical diets, basically 2/3 rolled corn with a smattering of roughage in there in the form of meal and pellets, you could argue. By the way, I love, that's cottonseed meal, but the hulls and the alfalfa pellets, very effective fiber from the cottonseed hulls. The pellets, I would not question very much in terms of their effectivity, but nonetheless, that was the consequence of what diets were typically fed. Our approach, as I alluded to earlier, is after arrival, those calves receive about 1% of their body weight with grass hay. We like using small squares, and we'll feed those calves 1% of their body weight on day 1. On day 2, we start what we call the Camp Pendleton diet, and we'll feed 1%, and I'll show you the composition of the diet the next day. That's all they get. There's no more hay provided in the diet. And then, based upon how those calves clean up their bunks, we'll bump up the allotted amount to those calves by 0.25% of their body weight until we achieve our final dry matter intake desired amount at about 2.2%. What makes this work, in our opinion, is that we utilize 40% of the diet as a co-product. And we're utilizing the highly digestible fiber, the fiber that's digestible, as opposed to the starch. So we're getting away from the starch with this particular diet mode. And so, you know, limit feeding, this is a picture out of the brands program that Iowa State developed. I actually approached them, and they included this in the program. And so if you know what the weight of your calves are, and you know the percentage of their body weight, you can calculate out the work is there. You guys have it at Oklahoma State as well. So you can basically calendar the needs of those calves and just step them all the way up as they grow through whatever their desired growing phase might whatever be. Again, some good work. Oklahoma State, you know, this Drs. Richards and Lallman followed up with Dr. Lusby, I believe. Dr. Gosh, he was on the tip of my tongue. Dr. Gill.
Don Gill.
Yes. So you guys have already done this, and this has been done. So hats off to you. I mean, I only got the one page here, but there was actually a follow-up in there that helped people understand how to manage their diets. And this is an excellent fact sheet, by the way. But again, this illustrates, this is a set of steers, and it just shows how you stepwise them up. And again, California Net Energy System is what, 51 years old now. Very accurate if you have a good idea on the body weight of the calves, and you have a good idea on the nutrient content of what you're feeding. It's very predictable. So I'm just going to show a few slides on our first trial that we did to kind of give you the mindset of what we did. Both trials, both of our the results of this research, I should say, are published. It's in the literature. But what we wanted to do was look at high performance limit fed diets using corn byproducts, looking at performance. We've done health, digestion. We looked at the immune function as well on these, and the immunocompetency as well with the feeding the ad lib versus these limit fed diets. We utilize 500-pound crossbred heifers. Our treatments are important to remark. We utilized a 45 NEG diet, and that was fed ad lib. The 50, 55, and 60 were offered to these cattle at 95, 90, and 85%. And every day we pinged off of the ad lib cattle. Those cattle were actually provided in their respective diets the amount based upon the total amount of ad lib. So we were doing this on a daily basis. And of course, we took account of the refusals, and we adjusted accordingly for the other treatments as well. This is actually the 4 diets that we originally looked at. The ad lib diet, formulated for 45 NEG, about 45% roughage between the alfalfa and prairie hay, both ground. about 8.5%, and this is on a dry matter basis, dry rolled corn, and we kept the sweet bran consistent, or our wet corn gluten feed consistent throughout all 4 dietary treatments. To where if you look at the 60 NEG, we're only feeding 13% roughage. We bumped the corn up to almost 39%. Again, 40% sweet bran, and our supplement included as well. It's important for me to tell you at this time, we have actually taken the alfalfa out and are now using 13% prairie hay. Protein coming from either the wet cake, wet distillers, or the wet corn gluten feed. We believe our proteins are 15-16% as they stand today, with the exclusion of the alfalfa. So this is what everything, when it was all said and done, the performance of the calves, and we were targeting for 2.25 pounds daily gain. This is our ad lib treatment here. Their ad lib consumption of that diet was about 2.62% of their body weight. They gained at 2.26, and it's like we almost cooked the numbers to make it look real, but that's how things generated out. They converted at 6.48 pounds of feed per pound of gain. On the other side of the spectrum, our calves, the 60 NEG calves, were fed at 85% of the ad lib calves. Their dry matter intake, on the other hand, was 2.25%. They gained at 2.4 and converted at 5.22 pounds per pounds of feed per pound of gain. And you could see the concentration in the diet. They were consuming 12.5 pounds of dry matter versus the calves that were consuming 14.5 pounds of dry matter. But think about what the diets consisted of. Mostly roughage, about 40% on the ad lib, and only about 13%. So every mouthful of ration of feed that those calves were consuming on the 60 NEG, they were getting energy dense consumption with every bite of feed that they took. We looked at health as well. And these are long-haul heifers out of Dixon, Tennessee, about a 12-hour truck ride. Sale barn origin calves coming out of northern Alabama and Tennessee proper. Yeah, we lost some calves in this particular trial, no question about it. And I didn't share any of the immunological parameters with you in this presentation, but it is published in the Journal of Animal Science if you'd look under Dr. Sporer. We looked at energy level on ruminal pH. I mean, you start thinking about potential impacts to these calves at this early stage of development. We used some indwelling ruminal boli they're called Smax-Tech from Austria, and we monitored the pH. These values were collected. They were collected every 10 minutes. And you can see that with increasing energy density in the diet, our pHs got down rather low, and the time below 5.5, you could see it increase significantly. And to show it another way, this is what it looks like over a 24-hour period. So as you would imagine, post-feeding, the 60 NEG pH gets down here fairly low, 5.4, and it's up to debate. It could be a period of how long the pH stays down low in terms of creating any subsequent damage to the rumen papillae. But you can see with the ad lib diet, it barely broke. It was right around 5.8, but it really showed what happens with the energy content in these diets. And so we have questions about, we may be getting good performance on these calves, but are we doing anything in the feedlot that might be hampering their performance as we push them on down the road? So that was a good question. And we actually did a project, actually 2 iterations, working with our cooperator out of Pratt, Kansas, Pratt Feeders. We managed the cattle in a similar fashion, ad lib versus limit feeding in the backgrounding phase. And we maintained identity of these calves into the feedlot at Pratt. Okay, so to orient you to the slide, our treatment is the 45 NEG versus the 60. And we were really curious about liver abscesses. And we actually got Ty Lawrence and his meat lab crew up to actually do the scoring on our liver abscesses at National there in Dodge City. And no significant differences between the two. And I'm not going to overbear the results that we got. Those are soon to be published. They'll be available in our Cattlemen's Day reports in March of 2022. Okay, back to limit feeding, and as a consequence of removing roughage out of the diets. It's kind of funny, guys. You think about, we're ruminant nutritionists and we're trying to really utilize the rumen to leverage the capability of utilizing roughages and stuff like that. But when you look at it from a whole farm perspective, manure management is really, it's a challenge for a lot of operations in terms of managing their farm soils from a compaction perspective, weed load. It's especially if you're in a no-till situation. And I took this picture with my drone. It's pretty hard to fly, but I do get it going up in the air occasionally. Can you tell the differences between the pens? Can you guess what color the orange circled pens represent? What treatment? Is that the limit fed, or would that be the ad lib fed pens? Yeah, the orange are the limit fed 60 NEG fed pens. Less moisture, less manure. And so we'll show you some of the results to support that. This is some work actually from our digestibility work with the cannulated steers. So you can see the differences in intake between our two diets right off the top from our restrictions. You can see, because as a consequence of the amount of fiber in the diet, vastly lower, our dry matter digestibility is improved. Organic matter, our NDF and ADF digestibility, surprisingly, no direct impact on the digestibility of those two components in our roughages. But really, at the end of the day, you look at the bottom and you look at the amount of manure that is exiting the system from feeding. 4.34 pounds versus 7.52 pounds per calf. And for us, we have to haul our manure to adjacent farms about 10 or 12 miles. And our costs, we figured it costs us about a nickel a head a day. And by full feeding versus limit feeding, our savings is about 5 cents a head a day, because we're simply hauling less manure out, i.e. undigested roughage, if you will. Let's talk about bunk management. It's really, normally we talk about bunk management and recognize its importance. And you go back to the literature, you always talk about making darn sure you have adequate bunk space, especially when you're limit feeding, so that those calves all have an equal opportunity to get up there to that limited amount of ration presented to them. The question is, how much? You got empty bunks, especially when you're training these calves and they're hungry and they're aggressive. It's nerve-wracking until their guts adapt to that once a day feeding. I will tell you from personal experience, those bunks will be cleaned 4 to 6 hours post feeding. And you have to be disciplined to just walk away and make sure you got good facilities to hold those calves in during that initial training period. But they adapt, they settle down, and they know they're going to be fed once a day, and those bunks are clean. So having excess feed that can get rained on or snowed in, and then you have to hassle with cleaning it and dealing with refusals and birds and rodent issues, those bunks are stripped clean. We did a study. I have a PhD student right now that is had actually done a project last year in January and February. We actually looked at 4 different bunk space allotments, 10, 15, 20, and 25 inches per animal allotment. You can see they came in, at about 475 pounds. And it was about a day, about a 2-month trial. But when it was all said and done, this is the average performances by bunk space allotment that we observed. You could see there that it approached significance from a quad perspective, a quadratic. But when it was all said and done, there was nothing to suggest that you go down that far. I'm certainly not advocating that 10 inches per animal, but with the expense of our concrete for bunks and apron and facilities, I think we can certainly push down to 15 inches per animal and get by fine. The other thing about limit feeding is the entire logistics. We actually did try. We hooked GoPro cameras up on our tractor and our feed mixer, and tried to go back and look at calves coming up to the bunk and trying to score how, their enthusiasm factor, if you will, trying to get a handle on that and try to look at it from a animal health perspective. We had virtually no animal health in the 2 trials that we use these GoPro cameras on. But in terms of time to mix, when you put a 40% roughage in a mixer, as opposed to only 13%, the mixing time and the number of loads that you can deliver per, the number of poundage that you can deliver per animal from an energy density perspective, you might be able to shave off a half a load a day in terms of tractor time and actual time spent getting the rations prepared on a daily basis. There's a lot to it, and actually, Dr. Glenn Tonzer and his student Claudia Hissong, they were part of this project. This was another beef checkoff study that we did, and it's available in her thesis. And they looked at this from a sustainability perspective. Here at the unit, we rent our tractors, and it costs us about $22 an hour per tractor hour to rent it. And I'm afraid to look at this next year's increase in leasing for our tractors with everything that's going on in our country today. But if we can save fuel time, labor time, and you're feeding once a day, especially with our producers out there that, especially busy times of the year when they're planning and so forth, it's something to be thinking about, I guess. How about other co-products besides sweet bran or the wet corn gluten feed? We did some work with wet distillers. I won't go through all the details here. This is going to be recorded. I presume the PDF will be the PDF will be available to folks that want to look. But we pulled calves in out of Groesbeck, Texas, and Hatch, New Mexico. A little heavier steers, 560 pounds. We did a 2x2 factorial, looking at 2 corn byproducts, that being the wet distillers wet cake and sweet bran, versus feeding it whole shelled and dry rolled corn, trying to simplify these diets. I mean, we're down now to 4 ingredients for growing these calves. Nothing fancy. We're talking about prairie hay, corn, the co-product, and the mineral supplement. Just 4 ingredients. We formulated them to deliver 60 megacals per pound. We had 8 pens per treatment combination. And when we look at average daily gain across the board, no significant differences between sweet bran, dry rolled corn, sweet bran, whole corn, no difference whatsoever between the 4 treatments. In terms of efficiency, gain to feed expressed, no significant differences whatsoever using the whole shelled corn. And we have done work in the past, and again, it's nothing new. Whole shelled corn work, you go back to the old Oklahoma State work, Nebraska. I mean, we've known about this stuff since the 60s, right? And it still works. It holds true. And it just simplifies life for our producers without having to worry about processing their corn with the right size of calf. Works just fine. So we concluded from this that there's no differences in performance, no impacts on health. And I should have said that in this particular trial, we restricted the intake of these calves to 2% rather than 2.2. I will tell you that we believe our sweet spot with growing calves is at 2.2%. We've had a lot of good luck with 2.2, and with all our other research that we'll do down the road, that's where we're going to shoot at with our calves. So, 9 trials and ongoing. There's no adverse effects on health. I have to tell you, the cattle that we feed at the stocker unit at K-State, they're all producer-owned cattle. They're owned by Pratt feeders. And don't think for a minute, if we were creating issues for their feed yard, sending them calves after we've had them anywhere from 60 to 90 days, they'd be on the phone to me pretty darn quick. They've not observed anything out of the ordinary with those calves performing going into their yard. In our facility with feed efficiency, we've seen anywhere from 27 to 35% improvement in feed efficiency. And with corn, pricing it as it is, there's some great opportunities there, I think. So as I get to the end of the presentation and I put limit feeding in the middle here, there's a lot of pluses about limit feeding. And my hat's off to those folks that did this work 30, 40 years ago. I mean, we just basically refined it and took advantage of the fact that there can be a lot of co-products available, and we need to leverage those things because of the digestible fiber as much as we can. We believe there's improvement in health detection. It just stands to reason that if those calves are trained to know that they need to come up and eat when they need to, and there's calves that are holding back at the back of the pen, there's something going on there. And I think that greatly facilitates improved health detection. We've demonstrated improved feed efficiency, the reduction in manure output, and the improvement in market planning. I did not include that in this particular slide set, but my colleagues over in Ag Econ at K-State, I encourage you folks to look at beefbasis.com. There's an amazing means by which to calculate value of gain. And I did an example for an old boy here in Kansas, actually buying cattle out of Oklahoma City. And I did a ration for him. I did his ration work. And then I also plotted out over 120 days what the value of gain would be for these calves to help him plan his particular marketing window, looking at that using the futures for corn and certainly for feeder cattle. It's a great tool. I encourage you to look at it. And I use it almost routinely every time I do any growing calf nutrition work. Folks, with that, I have nothing other to say. I didn't want to hold people too much. It's 12:38, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions if there's anything.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Blasi. We have a question coming in from Brian Frecking. He's like to hear your opinion about the number of times feed delivered. Would 2 times per day feed delivery change anything? Feed efficiency or manure output, and as far as that goes?
That's a good question. The one thing about us using the those Smax Tech boluses, every time there's a meal consumption, you'll see the rumen, you'll see the bugs go into action. In terms of manure output or feed efficiency, I doubt it. And we've never done the 2 time a day delivery. We wanted to keep things simple. I'm just thinking of the folks that are diversified and they're corn farming. You provide that ration once in the morning or even at night, and be done with it. Now, I did not include this particular work. We just got this kid defended with his master's here about 3 weeks ago. And in fact, he was an OSU undergraduate. He come up here to do his master's with us. And we looked at feeding in the morning and feeding the diet at night. And unfortunately, where we're at in Kansas, we didn't have the kind of environment that you experienced, David, back in your days at Montana State, to really get that extended, protracted cold period to try to leverage that heat of fermentation during the night to hopefully reduce any maintenance requirements of these calves. But we also fed calves in these switchover pens. And what I call as a switchover pen is we would bring the calves in the morning and feed them. And about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, after they completely clean their diet, we would move them out and bring in another group. So we were able to leverage double the number of calves with a set amount of infrastructure, if you know what I'm saying. We've double fed. Now it took labor. You had to basically get out there and move one set out and move another set in. We got by fine. So coming back to your question, Brian, I think you might be able to detect some differences in manure output because you're only putting, you're feeding a limited amount in the first place, and you're just spacing it out. That's interesting. I'd have to do some literature digging to dig into that limit feeding and doing it twice a day versus once a day. That's a good idea. That's a good research project to do down the road to look at that. I know my people will not like it because they like to get the feeding done in the morning. And then we got our projects that we're doing around the facility the rest of the day. And then you got to grab a student to get out there and mix the diet up again and feed it again. So that's a good question. I wish I knew the good answer for it though.
Dr. Blasi, how critical is timing of feed delivery and consistency of delivery?
It's important. I mean, you got to treat these cattle on a limit fed. If you're going to feed at 7 or 8 o'clock every morning, you need to be in the mark there because, you know, you always are running the risk with them woofing down too much feed too fast and maybe creating some of that pH issue that I showed the group. So you got to be consistent, and you got to have scales on your feed wagon too. I've had producers ask me if they could do this for calves on grass traps. And in that situation, you're really not limit feeding. Those calves have access to feed out there and they're going to top off what their needs are. You're not actually limit feeding. You're augmenting, you're supplementing what you think they're getting out there. If you've got Bermuda pasture out there or what have you, you're not really limit feeding. Something to think about.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Dr. Beck, I've got one for Dr. Blasi. So, you know, we've got some producers that could do this. They would have kind of variable feeding equipment. Some would have vertical mixers. Some would have I don't know what you call them, horizontal mixers, I guess. So my question is, you know, is that important? Maybe the real question is the roughage portion of the diet and particle size important? You know, the custom grinders that come by, and a lot of people that feed cattle like this use those folks or a machine like that. It's going to be a lot finer, and you're going to have a lot more dust and fines than someone with a vertical mixer. So what are your thoughts on that?
You know, we use prairie hay, and I would say quality wise, it's probably around 6% at best. I mean, we're not talking about June or even July cut prairie hay. In many cases, folks want to maximize their yield, and they'll go as late into the year as humanly possible. And so we're not dealing with very good quality stuff. And yes, we do grind it. And yes, we grind it fine. We don't, we use our standard screens when we grind, and we pay the dollars per hour, just like our producers do. And we just gotten away from the alfalfa completely and relying on that 13% prairie hay. And you guys down in your neck of the woods, you know, you may have Bermuda grass, and of course you got the prairie as well. It's kind of a standby for our part of the country, right? We've not looked at the quality like brome, for example, or even oat hay, oat has a tendency to perhaps bloat a little bit. I feel more comfortable with the prairie hay. You folks are much closer to that cotton stuff. That's pretty expensive stuff for us up here. I'd love to do some work with cottonseed hulls. And coincidentally, I mentioned before the program started, we're actually doing some limit fed work right now using California almond hulls. For those folks, I have no dreams that we'll ever see almond hulls shipped this far east, but I think that the roughage, we're looking at the effective fiber of almond hulls, and I think the cottonseed hulls I love them, and I think that would make the diet flow easier. But you guys know, and maybe with the oil and gas industry being held up like it is right now, there might be a supply of that. I don't know, but we sure like it when we can get it up here. David, I don't know if I'm doing a good job of answering your question. We standard grind, and I don't know, we pay, I wish I should know the number. I've seen it, but I can't recall it at this point. But we do bring a grinder in, and he'll do 60 to 90 large drum bales at a time, fill up our little commodity shed as much as we can do.
All right, I don't see any other questions being added to our chat or see anything else coming on. So Dr. Blasi, we really appreciate the information. This really takes, as you said, that limit feeding or program feeding has been around for a long time, but I think it's a really great next step and change of diets that really needed to be looked at. So really appreciate the research and the work you're doing and your time spending with us today.
Thank you, Paul.
With that, along with Dr. Lallman and Dr. Biggs, this is our last Ranchers Thursday for the year. We're going to take a hiatus until after Christmas. At some point, we will start programming again at the new year. So Dave, Roslyn, you have anything to add? Or
these will be available at beef.okstate.edu, the videos.
do we have a survey to?
Yes, so we should have a survey as everybody closes out today. If you don't mind, it is an anonymous survey. So if you'll take a moment or two to answer those, it helps us direct our programming and get some feedback of where you are in Oklahoma or otherwise on some of the topics that we've discussed today and throughout the past several weeks, and look forward to also suggestions. If you have ideas for us to take a look at or ways to improve it, we sure want to hear those too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good stuff. Thank you, Dale.
Bye now.